Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Peters. It's February the 1st, 1990. I'd like to introduce or reintroduce Mr. George Thorman. George and I have been discussing the War of 1812. In our last episode, we left off in August of 1814, and Malin Burwell had just been released by the Americans and was back in Canada. And we're going to go back and discuss what was going on, what was happening in Port Talbot in August of 1814,
okay, well,
George.
This was a very serious raid, and what they did is, as well as taking Burwell prisoner and letting Talbot escape, much to their chagrin if they ever found out about it, is that they looted all the houses. They looted about 50 families who lived on the North Branch Talbot Road, which is starting at Iona down to what's now, there was no Iona then, down to what's now Talbotville, and then up towards Lambeth into Westminster. And they also looted the families on the old Talbot Road, which just is our Talbot Street running right out to Burwell's Corners. Yes. And they started there, and they looted all the houses just about down to just west of St. Thomas. And when they looted a house, then, now remember these people, most of them had come in 1810, 1811, some in 1812, just before the war. They didn't have very much.
No. And
what this group in the August 16th, 1814 raid were mostly Indians. And they would be interested in clothing, they'd be interested in cooking implements, and of course they would have a couple meals, they'd be interested in pigs or cattle or anything they could. And what the settlers did, of course, is that if they had any warning that a raid was coming, you know, they'd, even without a raid, if they had a horse, you know, they'd keep it away in the woods, or if they had a cow, they'd keep it away from the house, eh?
Yes.
Because there'd been so many raids that summer. And so the people sort of left with what they were dressed in, eh? And, you know...
Would they burn your house down? And
No, they didn't do any burning of the house down or anything. No, they didn't do that. But they did steal everything, eh?
Yes.
And, you know, if you had hams preserved or something, they would take that. You know, they're looking for food, they're looking for clothing, and not many people had silverware or fancy stuff then, but they did. You know, people had what we call a palliasse, which you fill with straw for a mattress. They'd dump one of those out, and then they'd, you know, fill that, use it as a sort of saddlebag to take their loot with them. And so what Talbot did, this is very interesting. He made out a list of these families who were looted on August the 16th, and he sent this to the Relief Society, who was raising money to help, you know, people who suffered in
Where
the war.
was this Relief
Well,
Society
it was down
based?
in York, I think, or Ancaster, eh? What was the right name from it? Their records are so fragile that you just kind of can't look at them. You know, you'd have to get them on microfilm. You can't look at the original. But some of them were published in Cruikshank's account. Now, this starts with John Axford and Samuel Axford, who were on the lots 1 and 2 on the North Branch Talbot Road. Now, John Axford had a wife and 5 children, and Samuel had a wife and 4 children. And then John Axford then deserts. You know, he just suffered too much, eh? And then he deserts to the Americans. And so he lost title to his lot out there on the North Branch Talbot Road. But what is interesting, that in this list, when it lists the dependents, you get an idea of how many children they had, you see. And like, of the Burwells, James Burwell had a wife and 11 children.
Oh, boy.
But they're all grown up, most of them. Malin Burwell, a wife and 2 children. But when he was captured, his wife was pregnant, and that child was born when he was in captivity. And then later on, when he comes back and he builds at Burwell Corners, that child falls into a bucket of soap that Burwell is making. And
tragic.
Yeah, real tragedy. They had a couple of children after that. So you have Robert Burwell, Samuel Burwell, and they, of course, 3 of these people, Nathan Baldwin and the 2 Burwells, had been wounded at Lundys Lane. That was a battle that was fought on the 25th of July. And Only one company from this area was in that battle. I was Captain Gilman Wilson's company, and his payroll says duty at the Niagara Frontier in Lundys Lane. And so these are, the genealogists find this kind of list interesting because it does give the number of children. Eh?
Now, if somebody wanted to have a look at this list,
We have these
available
all
at
in
the
the
museum,
and we have the cards of record of service are in the museum, and we have all the payroll in a book that they can look in the museum if they're interested. And well, that's so much for that raid of August the 16th. Now, no damage except theft, eh?
Yes.
And that was really serious enough. Well, then Westbrook comes back for another raid. He made half a dozen, and he was a vicious guy. He went to Oxford, and he captured...
But just to reiterate, Westbrook was originally from Westminster Township.
That's right.
And he deserted and went to the Americans.
That's right. He went to the Americans right at the start, and he got so mad at Talbot that he came back to Delaware, where he had a place, and he burned his own property, so it would be of no value to anybody here. Eh?
Boy.
Kind of hard feelings.
Yes.
Anyway, he went to Oxford and raided the Oxford Militia and captured 3 officers. And then he's coming back from Oxford with some cattle he captured, eh? And he's driving those cattle. Now, here the accounts differ. They say one account says that Westbrook always rode a white horse. And so the Middlesex militia set an ambush over in Springbank Park. We don't know just exactly where that is. And I think the man who was in charge of that ambush was John Burwell from the Middlesex militia, who was a sergeant. And what they did, they waited for Westbrook and his prisoners to come back from Oxford. And but Westbrook was driving the cattle. He was in the end of it. Okay? Mm-hmm. And Carroll was riding a white horse. He was a captain from the Oxford militia, been captured. So they see them riding along, and from the hill, they pour a volley in, and they kill Carroll. He's killed by his own men. And then the rest of the Americans turn around and they go back, and Westbrook is able to hide them, find a place in the forest where they can hide. And then the next day, they went back and continued on their way to Detroit. But then he didn't go all the way to Detroit. He stayed around, and on the 9th of September, there's a group of American soldiers who come from Detroit, and Westbrook leads them to Port Talbot. And this time, Westbrook burned both the mills. They had a sawmill and a grist mill. And that meant that until about 1817, there's no mill in the whole of Elgin County to grind grain, yes. Until Rapalchia builds a mill down here in west of the town. So he burned the 2 mills, and then he burned Burwell's house and his registry office.
Well, this was the whole Port Talbot settlement?
No, you got to remember, the Port Talbot settlement at that time, the mills, you know when you drive and you go into Port Talbot now,
yes.
Like Talbot's
on the north side of the road.
Yeah,
is where
on
we're
Talbot's house and all the little buildings there weren't burnt. But the 2 mills were down in the valley, and Burwell's house was down there too.
And the registry office was there.
That's right.
And there was a distillery there too, wasn't there? I think doesn't that appear on the map? Of
maybe the distillery. I'm not sure it was there. There was a sort of horse-drawn mill too.
Yes.
Where horses could draw a thing around to grind stuff. And but now the registry office, the first registry office of the Elgin County, was in Burwell's house, and that little place he had, a little office there. But what Burwell had done is he'd taken all the documents. He wouldn't have that many by 1814, and he put them in a wooden box, and he gave them to one of the settlers to hide. Now, he never tells the name of that person. That's kind of a shame. That was the second registry officer. When he came back in 1815, he would, and we know those documents are down in our registry office now.
Yes.
Otherwise, they would have all been burned.
Destroyed by the Americans, yes.
So, but he lost his house, and his wife was just sent away, pregnant, several months pregnant at that time. And when he was in captivity, he heard the news his wife had the baby. which was some consolation to him, you know. Anyway, that was a, and then after they burned those places, then there's no use raiding North Branch Talbot Road and the Talbot Road to St. Thomas. This time they came right through St. Thomas, and they, how many? They, 25 homes were looted, starting with the names here: Barrett, Clark, Thomas Curtis, John Davis, Finley Grant, George Lawrence, the Lees, David Mandeville, Archibald McNeil, man who gave the land to the Catholic Church, James Neville, Margaret Pease, Henry Ramey, David Rappelcher, George Rappelcher, Jeremiah Rappelcher, Alexander Ross, William Schaff, Garrett Smith, who had Lot 1 North here, William Tolles, and Justice Wilcox and Benjamin Wilson. He just had a wife then. And again, they list the number of children. So, and again, the same thing happened. Now, on that raid, when they got to the widow Pease's place, which was, we don't know just where she was. She was a lead.
No, we're okay.
All right. There was a loaded musket there, and some American guy found the musket, and he said, "I'm not going to use this damn musket against us Americans." And he banged it against the wall, and the thing went off and gave him a fatal wound.
Oh.
And he died on the floor of her kitchen, and he's buried there.
But we don't know where that is.
Well, I think it's where Centennial School is, that road running up there. And I think she, the widow Pease, her husband died in the war. And Finley Grant was a boarder there. He was single at the time. And I think it was he who had loaded the musket. And now Garrett Smith's wife in that raid, or Garrett Oak's wife, had left a barrel of pork right out in the open. They thought it was just a rain barrel, you know. Just and saved that. And I think Garrett Smith's wife rolled a barrel of stuff out into the wheat field that they had. And,
yes.
But you know, the raids were really vicious. You know, if you think of stealing a cooking pot.
That's
you know,
right.
Yeah, you just can't run down to a store and
buy
another one. You know.
Well, George, I read that when these troops came to present-day St. Thomas or Kettle Creek Village, that they looted the Rappelgee house.
Well, this is see, now they got something from the Rappelges in that 9th of September raid, but the next one is the worst raid. And
okay, this is then we're getting to MacArthur's Raid.
That's right. Now
okay.
MacArthur was from Ohio, and he was a member of that lodge that Burwell visited when he was in Chillicothe, Ohio, and he became a governor of Ohio. And at one time, MacArthur had suggested to the Americans that the only way to have any security was to move all the settlers on the Thames and take them back into the States. And then so he planned an attack. And he put out a lot of false rumors, including letters in the paper. He was going to go north and attack the Indians at Saginaw. And instead of that, he had 600 mounted Kentucky riflemen,
Yes.
and about 50 Indians. So what they did is they left Detroit and they went north, and then they had boats come and take them across Lake St. Clair, and then they took a roundabout way through the wilderness there and ended up at Moravian Town. To everyone's surprise, nobody knew they were coming. However, some word did get away to Oxford. Went from Moravian Town to Oxford, which is now Ingersoll. It was called Oxford then, but that's where Ingersoll is now. And then they went to Burford, and they burned some houses and things there because these guys had given notice that they were coming. Mm-hmm. Now, you have 650 mounted men that got to eat every day. Right. And MacArthur writes in his account that we never stole a thing and we gave everybody a voucher. And I'd be you know, what they do is they'd stop and they say, well, we're taking your 2 pigs. We signed the thing, the United States Army's taking these 2 pigs for our troops, and you'll be compensated after the war. And, of course, the British did the same thing.
Did they?
Well, they never got compensated for a lot of these things. Like even for, remember we're talking about Metcalf and getting supplies from people. I doubt whether they were ever paid for those. Anyway, it'd be nice if somebody could find one of those vouchers.
Yes.
Yeah. So he went as far, what his plan was to go all the way across Ontario and get to the Niagara frontier and make a liaison with the American general there. But the American general was getting the pants beaten off him on the Niagara Frontier at the time. And when they got to the Grand River, they took the ferry to the other side, and it was in flood, and he couldn't get across. And then he had news, too, that the Americans weren't doing very well on the Niagara Frontier. But it was a very bold scheme, and it might have worked. So then he turned south, and he, at Malcolm Mills, was a little town of Scotland there, you know.
Yes.
That's where the Malcolm Mills were. And the Middlesex militia had some men there. And they were defeated, you know. He outflanked them, so he burned those mills, and he burned all the mills on the way down to the lake, eh? There were only a couple of mills that were left.
We have 10 minutes left.
All right, there were only a couple of mills that were left in Norfolk. One of those, that Bacchus mill, still exists.
Yes.
Eh? And MacArthur believed in a scorched earth policy that, you know, if we burn the mills, then they're not going to have any grain
That's
to
right.
sell to the British soldiers, not going to be able to have any flour to supply the army with. So then he turned around and came back. And it's very difficult to decide what night he was here, whether it was the 9th of November or the 10th of November. Eh? Anyway, he spent one night in St. Thomas. Now, you have 650 mounted men, and they are down where the military museum is, and along that bank there.
Yes.
And, of course, Rappelch's farm is right there. And they take his fence railings for fires, and they kill his sheep. Now, it takes a lot of sheep to feed 650 men. They steal his honey, and they use his crop to feed their horses. And, of course, what they did every place where they went along, if a horse got lame, they just lifted another horse from somebody else.
Yes.
And all of the, after the war, all these people put in claims for horses and pigs and things that were stolen. And pages and pages of that stuff. And the Malcolm Mills, they wanted compensation, never got any for about 20 years. And that's why they, in 1837 and 8, became rebels and joined the Reform Party. So MacArthur's here one day, or one night. And that's when Alida Rappelcha, her father isn't back from...
Oh, he was in Oakland?
He was in Malcolm Mills.
Okay.
Okay. I think Scotland's right. I may be wrong on that, but
It's in the same, right in that area, yes.
And so, taking her dress, and you know, she grabbed it back from. And then there's the other story about her.
Didn't she go to get to the spring and get some water?
Got her, and somebody's trying to slip an arm around her,
and she hit him with the
water
pail.
pail.
He went down the hill.
Pail, yeah. No, I don't know whether they're both in the same raid with MacArthur,
Yeah.
or whether one of those was on the raid of.
Well,
9th
George,
of September.
I also read that Mrs. Rappelgee was entrusted with a lot of documents from Colonel Talbot. Is there any truth to that?
I think so, and that they were hidden out in a flax field or something. Yeah. See, Talbot, just like Burwell with the registry office, like our second registry office in the county is that box that he had all of these in, wherever they were. You'd just love to know what person. I have an idea it may have been someone who was down around what's now Union, an out-of-the-way place.
Right. See, the troops, they would have followed the Talbot Road. They wouldn't really go off the Talbot Road.
No, they used the Talbot Road and then over to Muncie and then Delaware, and then use that Longwoods Road going down there. Now, that was the MacArthur Raid. That was the last raid, and but now the militia is still out on duty and so on. But by the time when the treaty again is signed, ending
Which was,
the war,
the 24th of December, 1814.
and but by the time that news gets by sailing ship across the ocean, it's a month and a half before the news is disseminated in the States and Canada that the war has officially ended. So a lot of the militia troops were still out on duty in January and February and March of 1850. But there wasn't any more fighting, there wasn't any more raids. But the whole thing, if you can see the disaster of the raids, and
it must have caused a real setback to development in the settlements.
Yeah, I think from, say, 1814 to 1820, people were just sort of kind of catching up.
Yes.
And it took Rappelcha about 3 years after before he built the first mill down here. Then a lot more people started coming in. And
Well, George, you want to tell us a little bit about the Middlesex Militia?
Well,
We have about 5 minutes
all
left.
right. Well, in the militias, there were 2 regiments of Essex militia, one of Kent, one of Oxford, and 2 of Norfolk. And then there was only 1 of Middlesex. Like there's a letter, Talbot is asked about forming a militia in Middlesex, and he said, well, he didn't have enough officers or enough people to form one yet. I think this is about 1807 or 8. So the Middlesex militia is made up of those men who lived on what's along the Thames.
So this is the militia was a group of volunteers.
Well, no, the law was that between the age of 16 and 60, you had to be in the militia. And so when somebody says, my ancestor was here in 1814, and if he isn't in any of those militia payrolls, he wasn't here.
Right.
Because there's one of Barzillai Sampson out near New Sarum. He was supposed to be here about 1810 and 11.
But he
and
doesn't
never turns up on a payroll. So that means he probably spent the time back in Norfolk. And looking up land petitions, I found one man that didn't have any service, but that's because he'd had a real, just one arm.
Yes.
And so everybody was here, even some were over 60 served. But 16 to 60. And of course, that's the great myth that we're talking about, that those are the people that won the war, you see. So that, but the Middlesex militia, you have to be proud of them, eh?
Oh, yes.
And some of them had experience in the Army, not too many. Crane was a sergeant because he had been in the Army with Talbot,
Is this George Crane?
Yeah. So you have a relative of his come to the museum one time, and you'd like to have more information. They never send you anything. They take everything you can give them, and they never send anything.
Send it back.
Maddening, yeah.
Frustrating.
So and we wonder if there may be some payrolls missing. See,
well, where most of these
all of the payrolls,
where did they come from then?
all of these payrolls are down in Ottawa, and in many cases they have 4 copies of a payroll. The paperwork was just as bad then as it is now, if not worse. And so you'll find a payroll or 4 copies, and then a payroll you're looking for, no copy at all. And so what they've done down in Ottawa, I think they've microfilmed them, and they are destroying some of them. It's a matter of space.
Yes.
And I'm sure that some people have stolen payrolls from those archives. Now the security is so tight down there that it has to be.
Right.
You figure rather than sit there and copy a payroll out by hand and say, my God, they got 4 copies. Maybe they'd never miss one.
Yeah, but
it's a bad.
But you do miss it in time.
Oh yeah. And then sometimes in 4 payrolls there are different things.
Right.
There are little errors that you find. And the men had to sign for their pay the same way as we still do today. And,
George, who won the War of 1812? Can you say
I never
one
had
side
any doubts
won?
with that. I mean, we won the war because the Americans invaded, and we drove them out, and they stayed out. Now, they never admit that. They say it was just an incident in the war against Britain.
Well, we missed one thing. The burning of the White House in August of 1814, and the president's mansion, and that's why it's the White House today, because the scorch marks, they had to paint it white. Is that true?
I think so, yeah. And the Americans, of course, make a big to-do about that, and they never remember about they burned our provincial parliament buildings at York, and a lot of early documents were lost and everything else. So the War of 1812 is a very interesting war,
yes.
And we won it, yeah. The Indians lost.
Yes.
Like Tecumseh and those Indians all had to make their peace with the Americans, and then eventually they got shifted away. Yeah.
Well, we're down to about 1 minute left. I would just a couple quick announcements. Just a reminder that 1991 marks the 125th anniversary of the 25th Regiment, which became the 91st, and today's the Elgin Regiment. And there's a group of men from the regiment that are going to hold an anniversary celebrations, and They're looking at the dates of August 31st, September 1st, and September 2nd of 1991. If you are interested in helping out, please contact the Elgin Regiment. That's quite an anniversary, 125 years.
Yeah, but see, they got to go farther back than that because the St. Thomas Rifles, who became the #1 company in the 25th Regiment, they go back to 1857. That's their first. We've published all those, too. Payrolls of the volunteer rifle companies. Then in 1866, they were formed into the 25th Battalion. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank George Thorman for being our guest today, and thank you to the great crew at Allview 8 in assisting in putting this production together. George, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Steve.